Hey everybody, it's Will Venus and welcome back to a brand new episode of Cobble Icons. Today we'll be doing something that's slightly different to our usual character profiles by talking about the different faces and owners of the corner shop located in 15 Coronation Street. And so I will be talking about the past 60 years of on-screen owners. Just before we start, I upload quite a few times a week actually, and every single week for this Cobble Icon, so if that's something that you're interested in, I would definitely recommend hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on anything, and remember to hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of the fun. Now, I believe that the characters and buildings and the sets and things, I believe that they're all like a character of their own, and that's why I'm doing this little bio piece on the little corner shop at the end of Coronation Street. Because if you think about it, without those places for the characters to gather, there's not really a lot of scope for the place. Okay, just a little bit of history about the shop. The shop and the rest of the terraced houses on Coronation Street, it said, were built in 1902. When the shop first opened in 1902, the original owner was a Mr. Cedric Thwaite. I hope I've said that correctly. If I've not, tell me in the comments. Who previous to owning the shop was actually a pawn dealer. He ran that little business from his front room in his house away from Coronation Street. Okay, so moving on to more, I say recent times. I'm talking about 1945 to 1960. Okay, so this was just before Coronation Street started, which was on the 9th of December 1960. The shop was at that point in time owned by Elsie Lappin. She and her husband Les ran the shop until the mid-1950s. Les had a heart attack, and then Elsie had to run the shop, of course, on her own. And then when it got to around 1959, 1960, Elsie felt that she couldn't run it on her own, so she decided to sell up. And so when the first episode of Coronation Street was on in 1960 in December, the actual first scene was with Floria Lindley, who took over the shop in 1960. Now, if you're not sure who Floria Lindley is, I'll link the episode that I did about her up here so you can check that out. She owned the shop between 1960 and 1964. Then, towards the end of 1964 and then the beginning of 1965, the shop was taken over by Lionel Petty. Lionel was said to be a bit of an unfriendly, unapproachable character who sometimes had help in the shop from his daughter Sandra, and when the residents weren't really willing to put up with this negative behaviour, they actually boycotted the shop until his attitude changed. And I suppose, it's like with all shops, if you go into a shop and you're not really getting a good, valid, positive experience, you've every right to do that. I know that if I was shopping and wherever, if I got a negative experience, I wouldn't go back. Would you? And then so his attitude became a little more amenable, and then he decided to leave in 1966. From 1966 until 1968, married couple David and Irma Barlow. Irma was the daughter of Stan and Hilda Ogden. If you would like me to do an episode on them, let me know in the comments. I would be more than happy to do so. Yeah, so David decided he needed a new career change after having a really bad accident in his football career. He could no longer play football. And so he and his wife Irma decided that they would buy the shop. Now, if you can imagine having a mother like Hilda Ogden, who's always in the shop, always saying, "Can I have it on tick?" She had to be quite firm with her mother and saying, "No, we're not going to give you any credit because you're running up these huge bills and you can't afford to pay them back." And so that relationship got a little bit strained by that point because, you've got the conflict of, well, it's my mother. She's not got a great deal of money. My dad's quite lazy, he's not bringing in much money either, and you would have that conflict, wouldn't you? And so she just had to say point blank, "Look, Mum, I'm sorry, I can't give you any more tick." And then when David Barlow left the show, from 1968 until 1974, saw Les Clegg, Maggie Clegg and Irma Barlow run the shop. They took over the reins, and during this time, Ina Sharples, Valerie Barlow, Valerie was one of Ken's first wives. He's been married several times. Betty Turpin and her not discovered son Gordon helped out in the shop, and they just obviously did the day-to-day running. They would customers would come in asking for a half pound of ham or a few slices of bacon, because by that point it wasn't a self-service shop. It was still you would have to go to the counter and ask for whatever you wanted, and whatever assistant was working there or owner, they would go and take it off the shelf for you and prepare it. From 1974 till 1975, again, saw more changes when Vera Hopkins, played by the late great Kathy Staff, You remember her? She was in various things, including Open Hours and Last of the Summer Wine. Nora Batty. And so Vera and her mother-in-law, known locally as Gran, and they, just again took over the running of the shop. Now, during this time when they were cleaning out Maggie Clegg's old furniture, they came across some documents, and one of those documents was Gordon Clegg's birth certificate. Now, Gordon Clegg, he always believed that his mother was Maggie Clegg, but it turned out that according to this birth certificate, his mum was actually Betty Turpin. What happened was Betty had had an affair with a man called Ted Farrell, which was when she was married to Cyril Turpin, and that led to an illegitimate child. Now, obviously, way back in that particular period of time, things like illegitimate children and, like the phrase born out of wedlock was pretty much a taboo subject. And so Gordon was then raised believing that Maggie was his mum, because they just brought Gordon up as their own. But this is so planned. So in 1975, this secret did actually come out, and when Gordon found out that Betty Turpin was his mum, he just wholly accepted her and just embraced the new relationship of, I suppose, getting to know his new mum, if that makes sense. And that just led to a really strong relationship retrospectively. Also, in 75 to 76, so another very well-known face from Coronation Street take over working in the shop. Do you remember Blanche, Deirdre's mum, Blanche Hunt? She, way back then, ran the shop. She was actually the first person to not live in the flat above whilst working in the shop, deciding to keep her home that was away from the street. Gail Potter, as she was known then, she's since been known as Gail Tilsley, Gail Platt, Gail McIntyre, Gail Hillman and Gail Rodwell, with I think 7 marriages to 5 different men. Is that right? I think it is. Yeah, so she worked in the shop, and in return that paid for her lodgings in the flat above the shop. Blanche actually had to leave working in the shop because she actually had her own company, dressmaking, and she felt doing the dressmaking and running the shop at the same time was just too much for her, so she had to leave. Now we cut to 1976, and this saw quite a more affectionate duo at the helm. Rini Bradshaw, who was what you would call back then, I suppose, a spinster, just a single woman, she bought the shop. Now, when she bought the shop, it brought like a lot of continuity and stability to running the shop, because the way that she ran it, it was very structured, she knew exactly what she was doing, and she also wanted like a business so she could be closer to her brother Terry. She and her brother Terry lived in the flat above the shop, just so that you can, I suppose it's with all people that live above the shop, it's so that they can keep an eye on the business downstairs in case there's any thieves and, any potential damage or whatever. They could nip right down from the flat down below to the shop and just deal with any trouble. Now, when Rini's brother Terry left in the later 1970s, Rini took in another lodger, and that was in the form of the infamous Bet Lynch. Bet and Rini, they didn't always see eye to eye because they had different ways of living. Rini was quite a traditional, you have a boyfriend, you get married, then you live together. Bet was more, and always was, like a more free and easy person. She didn't really believe in, wholeheartedly believing that you had to be married to live together and things. Bet was more of an easygoing, open-minded person, just the kind of person that I like, actually. In 1978, Rini married Alf Roberts, and then, of course, became Rini Roberts, and they both ran the shop together as husband and wife. As husband and wife, they really gained the respect of their neighbours and customers, actually, because I suppose it's quite nice when you go into a shop knowing that it's run by husband and wife, because it's pretty much a labour of love. Because I suppose you share the passion and ethics that being a joint business owner have, because your main objective is to run a shop successfully. They were married for 2 years, but in 1980, tragedy soon struck because Rini was actually killed in a car accident. What had happened was Rini and Alf had planned to move to Grange over Sands, and during that trip their car broke down, and they were at these temporary traffic lights for roadworks, and there was a lorry that had faulty brakes, and the lorry actually crashed into the car. Rini died instantly, but Alf managed to survive, and so that was the end of Rini and Alf. For the next 13 years, Alf Roberts ran the shop on his own, It often came with a lot of conflict because periodically he actually worked as city councillor, so he had to kind of split his time between working in the shop and working as councillor, and obviously that's quite a lot of that entails quite a lot, much to the dismay of the people that worked for him running the shop, because when he wasn't running the shop, like I said, he was doing his councillor duties, and he was often there for short periods of time, going away when the people that worked in the shop needed him there, and yeah, it caused quite a lot of conflict. Now, in 1989, along with what I'm about to tell you, Coronation Street got a brand new family in the form of the McDonalds. So you had Jim, Liz, and then you had the twins, Steve and Andy. And Steve and Andy at that point in time were both teenagers. And in 1989, there was works being carried out opposite to the terraced houses. I like to call that side of the street the odd side, because the numbers are odd on the houses. Anyway, on the houses, on the space opposite the terraced houses, the warehouse factory was being pulled down, and in its place is the houses that you see opposite the terraced houses today. So it's like the salon, the three houses, and what was Mike Baldwin's Underworld, and Kevin's Garage, and the cabin. And so on that site there was a JCB, and Steve and Andy thought it would be just a hilarious idea to ride about in this JCB. And when they couldn't control it properly, they pushed down like these barriers, I think were like wooden barriers, and the JCB actually crashed into the front of Alf's shop. So what had to happen was the shop got a new front. Also, during these 13 years, Alf met a few years later down the line, after Rini died, Audrey Potter. Audrey was Gail's mum, Audrey Potter as she was known then. Alf married Audrey, and she became Mrs. Audrey Roberts, as she's known to this very day. And he and her ran the shop together as, new husband and wife duo. I would say that Audrey wasn't as keen as working in the shop as Alf was. Alf was very much like the shop was his life and soul, and Audrey, she, in my opinion, at times felt that working in a little corner shop was completely beneath her. She just wanted to be either at home doing her nails and hair or hitting the shops. But they managed to work together at certain stages. During this time, people such as Sally Webster, Ivy Brennan, known previously as Ivy Tilsley when she was married to Bert, they worked there. And there was a lot of the time when Audrey had to run the shop on her own. Now, in 1993, Alf suffered a heart attack, and also his friend Les Currie suffered a fatal heart attack. Now, at this point, Alf felt that running the shop was going to have too much of a strain on his heart, and so he went about selling his beloved shop because he didn't want to potentially leave Audrey as a widow. And of course, at this time, Audrey was very concerned about the strain on Alf's heart, so she persuaded him to sell up. And so in 1993, when he did eventually sell, what he did was he took down, as a memento, his sign of Alf Roberts Minimart, and he actually put this in his garage as a souvenir from his tenure in the shop. When he did eventually sell the shop, he sold it to a man called Brendan Scott. Brendan was actually a manager with the firm Freshco's, which was a supermarket in Coronation Street. Most of the Coronation Street residents shop there for their, groceries and weekly shop. Now, Brendan Scott, he had very grand ideas for what his vision of the shop was going to be. He changed the layout so the till was no longer at the front beside the door. The till was put back to its original place, which was at the back of the shop, which behind the counter was the door that led to the stockroom. And he completely renovated the inventory. In the place of usual comestibles such as, your tinned goods, cereals, bread and milk and various other things, he decided he was going to replace it with a much more upmarket type of stock. And, like other British fare, he wanted to sell like more exotic items that were quite foreign to the street back then. Things such as jarred olives, French cheeses, French breads, like just French patisserie items, and a much more salubrious selection of wines and things. And the uniform that the people had to wear when they worked in the shop was a bit out there. instead of wearing like their usual like tabards and things, it was swapped with like a Victorian style uniform. So like the whole place had like a Victorian-esque feel to the place, which by that point didn't really go down well with the residents of Coronation Street because they weren't quite ready for this whole new way of eating. All they wanted was their regular foods. Now, Brendan didn't last very long in his tenure of owning the corner shop. He only lasted 6 weeks. By that point, Brendan had taken on a bit too much because he had various other projects, and 6 weeks into owning the shop, he actually dropped down dead on the floor of a heart attack in the middle of the shop. And so when he suddenly passed away, his widow then became the new owner because he was married to a lady called Debbie, and the shop automatically became hers, because he hadn't really left any provisions because he didn't really see passing away in his near future. I suppose no one really sees that. Now, she decided that she didn't want responsibility of the shop because she wasn't really the working type at all. I would say she was quite a selfish person. She was only out for herself and she just wanted the money really, so she put the shop up for auction. And so in the summer of 1993, the shop was put up to auction, like I said, and who bought it back? None other than Alf Roberts. He bought the shop back, much to the dismay of Audrey, his wife. She absolutely hated the idea of him returning there because she saw the work as boring, monotonous, and I think deep down she really cared about Alf, so she was quite concerned about his general health because, like I said just a wee while ago, Alf's health wasn't the best when it came to his heart, and so, you know, having the strain of running a shop on your own would have a strain on your heart. I suppose also Audrey knew the full implications of working back in the shop because it was the early mornings, you know, taking delivery of bread and, you know, other items for the shop. That was just completely beneath her, in her opinion. And so they ran the shop right up until January 1994 because Alf had to also sell it because he was newly appointed as Mayor of Weatherfield. Now, obviously by that point in time, Alf was getting a little bit older and he couldn't really deal with the conflicts of interest, so he sold the shop so he could dedicate his time to being Mayor of Weatherfield. And so, yeah, again, new owners came in. And in January 1994, Reg and Maureen Holdsworth took over the reins. Now, Reg had already had vast experience of working in supermarkets because he was manager at Better Buys. Remember when he worked in Better Buys with Curly? And he just wanted like a new direction, and that direction was in the form of the corner shop. Reg, along with his wife Maureen, played by the fabulous Sherry Hewson, ran the shop with Reg's mother-in-law, the inimitable Maud Grimes. Now, Maud, the story went that Maud was never ever keen on Reg. Reg was never good enough for her daughter Maureen, and so at any given opportunity, Maud would taunt Reg for just about anything really, whether it was to do with running the shop, whether it was to do with the dodgy toupee that he used to wear, or, you know, his shortcomings as a husband. She just took every opportunity to get a dig in at him. But again, another owner getting tired of running the shop, Reg decided that he was going to take a new job within Furman's Freezers in the Lowestoft branch. And also at that time he'd ran off with a wages clerk called Yvonne, leaving poor Maureen and Maud to run the shop on their own, which is what they did for the next couple of years. And in 1996, Maureen actually went to Tavares to get a new sign entitled Maureen's Mini Market, which of course was placed on the outside of the shop. Now, in 1997, a new producer came in to the show and he did a lot of cast culling, and Maureen was one of them. The storyline went that Maureen was to run off to Germany with Bill Webster, who was Kevin's dad, and she left poor Maud to run the shop all on her own. And so when time came to sell the shop, Maud did all that she could to put up prospective buyers. And I remember one scene quite specifically actually. What Maud did was, when the shop was getting new units and things, before these new units were put permanently in place, she actually put a whole raw fish into one of these units. And of course, you know, when fish goes off, it begins to really, really, really smell. And yeah, that put off prospective buyers. But it didn't manage to put off the next owner in 1997, and that new owner was Fred Elliott. You remember him? He was the butcher. He would always go into the Rovers and ask for a Scotch and threat, and he would repeat the things that he says. So, for instance, I say, he's a butcher. Although I'm not really doing a great impression of that, but you'll know exactly who I mean. He ran the shop at the time with what we thought, his nephew, Ashley, but then a few years later down the line it transpired that Fred was actually Ashley's dad. And, like I said, history repeating itself yet again, Fred grew tired of the shop and he felt he had no option but to sell it. And so in the autumn of 1999 saw the new owner, Ravi Desai. Ravi bought the shop and he began to run it with his daughter, Nita, who also acted as manager of the shop, and her younger brother, Vikram, as kind of her right-hand man. Now, in the October of 1999, a family funeral in India meant that Ravi had to, travel back to India, and he left the shop in the hands of Nita and Vic. And around that time in 1989, their cousin, Dev Alahan, he came up to give them a helping hand, because he'd had quite a lot of experience in running shops. So yeah, that was quite a good thing for them to do, because it would, just benefit the shop. And, sorry, I've just noticed that it's snowing outside very heavily. Back to the video. Snow in April. Who knew? Yeah, after family debts and conflicts and simmering resentment, the shop changed hands once again. This happened in late 1999, and the new owner was Devendra Alahan. Dev is still the owner to this date in April 2021, which means that Dev's now been running the shop for over 20 years now. And I think that that's probably the longest tenure of a shop owner in Coronation Street. If I'm not, please tell me in the comments. It's okay to be wrong, correct me. And during Dev's tenure of running the shop has actually been blown up none other than twice. One in 2004 when his girlfriend, remember Mad Maya? She blew up all of his shops, including the one in Coronation Street. Maya's plan was to kill Dev and his then girlfriend Sunita by tying them up in the flat above the shop and turning on all the gas rings, and that led to a huge fire. And then again in 2010 when the tram, the big tram crash for the 50th anniversary, when the tram crashed into the front of the shop. And what had happened was the tram had derailed from the viaduct and careered straight into the shop and destroying the front area completely. During the past 20 years, residents such as Sophie Webster, following in the footsteps of her mum Sally, who'd worked there 20 years previously, Anna Windass, Mary Taylor, and more recently Evelyn Plummer and Kathy Matthews have all worked in the shop, helping Dev out. Changes to the shop made over the most recent years have included the installation of a cash point and a debit and credit card machine and contactless payments. Of course, Coronation Street reflects real life, so in real life these things were invented, so yeah, they just reflected them in the shop. Also, it boasts its current sign entitled DNS Alahan above the door. The DNS stands for Dev and Sunita, from Dev's deceased wife Sunita, which is a bit like a living memory. Now, I thought I would do a little bit of facts for you as we get to the end of this video. Originally, what is now the shop's stockroom, that was actually living quarters, and in the back of that there was actually what I like to call like a main back door, and the main back door followed out onto the Ginnel, which, if you don't know what the Ginnel is, it's like an alleyway that's at the back of the terraced houses, and of course it's now the stockroom. And way back in the 1970s and actually 1960s, when they filmed the exterior shots for the shop, because obviously you have interior studio filming and you have the outdoor filming, which is called the lot. The first exterior lot that they had was actually filmed indoors because they didn't have any outdoor filming areas yet. And then the second exterior set was actually built on an abandoned railway line, which was at the old Granada Studios. That whole first exterior street was actually just a a wooden facade. There was no back to it. When you went into what appears to be the houses, when you went into that area, all it was a field behind it, which I find quite fascinating. I don't know about you, but I really like all these kind of geeky details. I'm a Corrie geek, so if you're a Corrie geek as well, come subscribe. I hope you've enjoyed that little bit of trivia about Coronation Street's Corner Shop. Please tell me if you have any, specific memories of any scenes or favourite characters within the shop. I'd really, really like to know, because like I said, I'm a Corrie geek, so if I can share memories with someone, that'd be really cool, I think. Yeah, so please tell me in the comments if you have any fond memories of the little corner shop at the end of Coronation Street. If you've really enjoyed this video as much as I have researching it and creating it, please hit subscribe. I'd really love to have some new people here. It would be amazing to share all this with you. I upload these Cobble Icon videos every single Sunday at 7:30, which is when Coronation Street used to be on before they moved the Sunday episode to during the week. I thought it'd be quite a nice thing to do. And do let me know some suggestions for other character profiles, be it actual people, or if you want me to cover more buildings within Coronation Street. Yeah, I'm very up for that. Yeah, keep the suggestions coming in. And I do have another few episodes of this series available to view now. You can go onto my page to check them out, or you can see them at the playlist, which I'll leave at the end of this video. And if you really like what I'm all about, I've got many other different videos with loads of different topics, so definitely check that out. Now, one last thing before you go. If you would like to subscribe, you can click the sticker here, and if you've liked this video, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up. That would be really amazing. It's just so that I know that the kind of content that I'm putting out there really is worth it. Yeah? Cool. I'll see you again next week with another episode of Cobble Icons. Take care. Ta-ra, choke.